1.19 has given us packed mud and packed mud bricks, which makes wheat a pretty valuable resource nowadays. There's also the target block, which uses wheat for its crafting. Do you mind? Anyways, we got a wheat farm designed for you guys today. Make sure to stick around to the end of the video where I'll give you a couple of quick tips to help you build this farm faster. Before I tell you about some of the interesting challenges that we had to overcome during all these iterations, if you're looking for the block by block tutorial, then feel free to go down in the description and look for the timestamp. There's also one other thing that you should know. These farmers that you put into the farm have to have their pockets filled with 8 stacks of seeds before you put them in the farm, or else the farm will not work. Okay, so now you guys can go if you are just looking for the block by block. So this was my first iteration. It seemed really simple and seemed like it was going to work really well. Then when I got the Allays in here, they were actually connecting to note blocks above and below them. In this video, I'm going to assume that you know the mechanics about Allays because I feel like at this point it's pretty well known. So with the next design, I actually just routed all of the items coming through the note block. And this note block has a hopper minecart pushed into it. And I routed them over to the side so that we could put a piece of wool underneath so that they weren't being connected. And that seemed to work. However, this design is not very compact. As you can see, we have these air gaps here. So I wanted to tighten it up even further. Okay, and enter the final version number 1. This version works and it's been running the whole time I've been testing this other version, where this version broke multiple times when I was trying to iron out the kinks and everything. This one has just been chugging along the whole time. I would say I'd probably tested this like 10 hours and it's been working the whole time, pumping out around 600 wheat per hour. So this is a pretty foolproof version right here, I would say. So how does this thing work? The basic concept is a domino effect or a chain reaction, which starts with a throwaway item that is fed into the system. Each one of these bubbles represents a floor of wheat being collected. And then that item sets off a note that will get received by an allay, which is picking up wheat. And then the allay will then send the wheat back into the note block, which has the hopper minecart. And then that wheat and item both will go down to the next floor, which will create the same effect to the allays below there, and so on and so forth until we collect it at the bottom.
And then?
No, that's it.
Now that we know the basic concept of how this thing works, we can take a closer look. Now I'm going to assume that you know what each individual redstone component does by itself. We're just going to be taking a look at how these redstone components work together. Here is an isometric. Let's look at a side view. And now let's chop off some of the parts that we don't need to see right now. That's better. Now let's zoom into one of the floors that we need to look at more closely. Now let's slice off another chunk so that we can see what's going on behind the glass and wool. So this is the layer where everything happens. It's all started by an item that goes into the hopper minecart, which remember is pushed into the note block. And that item then goes to the hopper, which is feeding into the dropper. And when the dropper has an item, the comparator will light up. And this is where the redstone gets split. Well, one redstone signal goes down through this observer. When the comparator activates, the observer sees that, sends a signal down to this normal piston, which activates that. And then at the same time, this comparator is sending a signal to this redstone repeater, which is on delay. And when that lights up, this observer above it sees that and sends splits the signal again to two ways. First, it goes to the observer to the left here, which powers this yellow wool block right behind that, which activates the note block and sends a note to the allays to drop off more stuff. And at the same time, it powers this solid block above this observer, which if we slap that layer back on, you can see it is directly adjacent to a sticky piston, which pushes down an observer facing another observer, which is pointed into a solid block right there. And this solid block is getting an observer clock pulse, which is pulsing the dropper as items flow through it. And once the dropper runs out of items to drop, then the comparator will no longer power the repeater, which will turn off the repeater. And when the repeater turns off, the observer will send a final pulse through that solid block into the sticky piston, which picks up that observer and turns off the observer clock. The only thing we have left to talk about is this top part. How are we feeding in those throwaway items into the system to start the chain reaction? Well, the solution is pretty simple. We just have a dropper here, as you can see, and it is pulsed by an etho hopper clock, and that is on a pretty short timer. It's about 30 seconds or so, and every 30 seconds or so it'll power this dropper, and it'll drop an item into the system and start the chain reaction. Hopefully all of that made sense to you. Let me know down in the comments how it did. If it did make sense, congratulations, you are now an expert in Allay wheat farms. What I have behind me is just a second version that is further optimized. It produces 2K wheat as well as a bonus 3K seeds per hour. And the reason why we can do that is because the platforms are bigger. These are actually maxed out because an Allay can go 16 blocks away from the note block that it is attached to. So that's why we have this half circle platform size and 16 blocks. And we also have 3 farmers per floor, and they cannot reach their composters, which means that all of the seeds will drop down on the floor as well. And we have 2 extra allays that are holding seeds, and they will collect the seeds for us and drop it into the system the same way that wheat does. This is 7 stories tall. Overall, not that big of a build, but it still pumps out a ton of wheat. Now that we know how it works, hopefully, let's do the block by block tutorial. And I've tried to think about this in a way that is going to make it the most efficient way possible to build this, because I know getting redstone bits facing the right direction can kind of be tricky when you're first building something. So we're going to do stuff in a sequential fashion so that it's most efficient in my opinion. So we're going to build this version just because I'm going to assume you're going to want to try and get the most maximum amount of passive wheat that you possibly can, because why not, right? So let's start with building our resource collection area. I'm just going to do a double chest because that is a little bit more simple for the tutorial. But let's just start with a chest with a hopper going into it, and then 2 blocks off to the side. Then put a temporary scaffolding tower next to your hopper and build it up a good amount. That's good. And then looking away from your chest as you're going up this scaffolding, you're going to want to place a repeater, and then right click it twice, and then go up, and then as you're above it, you want an observer looking down at that repeater. And you can do that by holding spacebar and control at the same time. Kind of do it quickly. And then you want 2 solid blocks, another repeater, And then continue this for as many layers as you want. Every observer represents a new layer. Once you get to your desired height, then climb back down and place an observer facing up right next to the repeaters, and then a normal piston sticking out right underneath that, and do that going all the way down. Go back up, placing another observer facing into the first observer you placed with a piece of wool on the back side of that observer, and do that going all the way up. Now that you're at the top, go back down again, placing comparators facing into your repeaters. Next step, we're going to place our droppers on the bottom, facing down on the underside of every piece of wool. For this beginning part, you just want to punch out one block so you can get this first one. And do that all the way up. Once you're at the top, you're just going to want to put a one hopper facing into the dropper from standing on the wool that you placed earlier, with an additional piece of wool on the edge of that hopper. And do that all the way down. Next, you're going to want to cover all the sides of the hopper except the top, going all the way up. Once you're at the top, lay 4 more pieces of wool like this for each layer. Now you should have something looking like this. Go ahead and grab your rails and your minecart with hopper. Make sure you grab minecarts with hoppers or else this farm won't work. Place a rail with a minecart hopper and punch out the rail for every level. Place a temporary block right here so that you can see the rail underneath the minecart to punch it out from the corner. Once you have all of your minecarts in, place a normal piston first, 2 blocks away from it, and then a note block in front of that. And I like to use piston or buttons here just because it's a little bit easier for me. You just put a button on it real quick, press that button, and it presses the note block into the minecart. And then you can take out the piston and your temporary block after that, and do that for every level down. The redstone's almost done at this point. All we have to do is grab some sticky pistons, observers, some more scaffolding, place a tower right here, and then you're going to put a sticky piston on this bottom solid block and an observer facing towards the wool like that. And you're going to do that on every level going up. Make your way back down on your original scaffolding tower, placing a temporary block like this and an observer into that temporary block. Then go up your other tower, taking out these temporary blocks. Next, you're going to want to put glass everywhere to encase this and fill up all of the gaps like this on every side going all the way up. Once you're at the top, you're going to build 3 blocks up, and then place a dropper right above your first note block on your first layer. And then we're going to attach a etho hopper clock to this, or whatever clock you prefer. Now put your lever on the left side like this so that when you turn this on, it'll keep this redstone block away from the dropper. And you're going to put half a stack of items into one of these item hoppers. Then we're going to just place a hopper onto that dropper with a chest feeding it with some junk items. You can use any item you want here as long as it's not wheat or seeds. Now is probably a really good time to test out your redstone to see if you built everything correctly. So let's put a button on the side of this dropper. Make sure you have items in the dropper and press the button to feed it an item. If you built everything correctly, you should see items coming down. Sometimes items will get stuck like this, but don't worry about that because those items will eventually make it down. It's nothing to worry about. Most of the time what you'll find is that the items will make it all the way down. If I can open that, yes, we got some dirt coming all the way down. So that means that the redstone is working and we are ready to build the platforms for all of the crops and villagers and allays. Now for this part, as I mentioned before, this is where you can get really creative, but this is where you're going to put each level. It's on the same level as the note block, as you can see here. So let's just go ahead and outline that. And then I'm assuming you guys are gonna have your own shapes. I would love to see if you guys end up building this farm. I would love to see what kind of shapes you guys come up with. That's pretty much it for the block by block tutorial. The only other thing you need to know is that if you're going to do more than one villager per floor, then you have to put trapdoors around the composter such that they will not be able to access the composter. And you do that by placing it one down below, above and around the composter like this. This way, it ensures that they can't get to the composter, they can't ruin all of their seeds, but they can still actually use this dirt as plantable. Thanks for staying towards the end of the video. Now a couple of tips to help you guys process these villagers a little bit quicker. If you're using Logical Geek Boy's Infinite Villager Breeder, which still works in 1.19, then you're going to have villagers coming out on rails like this. And for example, you could stop these villagers on an unpowered red rail, put a chest above their heads, fill one row up with seeds, and then make sure you stand a little bit ways away. Break the chest, and they should fill their pockets up with seeds a little bit quicker than throwing them stack by stack. And then you could press this button to send them on their way. My second tip is you could use a bubble vader to move these villages vertically to get them to their platforms, and at the top you could use something like this instead of building a huge railway all the way to the top. You just press the button from here, goes into the elevator, flies up, and he is now in place on the right level. And then you just have to rebuild this on the different levels. My third and final tip is to make sure to remember to use fortune on the tools that you're using to harvest your wheat for more wheat seeds. So you can see here, I'm going to harvest half this field with just my hand. Let's see how many seeds we get. Okay, we got 46. And now we use a pickaxe with fortune 3. And you can see that gave us a stack and 9. So that way you can get seeds easier to fill the pockets of your farmers before you put them into your farm. That's going to put a pin in this one for now. I'm super excited to build this in one of my survival worlds. I hope you are too. Let me know if you end up building this farm. And also if you ever have any problems with the farm, I would be happy to take a look at it, and I'll do my best to try and help you guys with any problems that you may have. Okay, I hope you guys have a good one. Bye.